can you tell that Formula One is back this weekend? We are headed to Spa and the announcements are just coming thick and fast. We had, obviously, Daniel Ricciardo has come to an agreement with McLaren for the end of this 2022 season. And now on top of that, we've got another announcement, this time from Audi, as to their position moving in to the 2026 season. It seems like Audi is going to be joining the grid for the 2026 season. And they announced this little video here where they've shown off a livery for the Audi car, and to be fair to them, it is absolutely beautiful. It is sublime, and we're going to see Audi in Formula One sooner rather than later. A guaranteed new player coming to the team, and that means that we're just going to see 11 teams, possibly by the time we get to 2026, even more teams joining the grid. And I've been a big advocate for this for Formula One. I genuinely think there are so many talented drivers out there right now. We've seen it with Oscar Piastri this year, where he's had to take a back seat at Alpine. We've seen it with Porsche. We've got Sargent coming through. We've seen it with the likes of Nick De Vries, who hasn't been able to get a seat in Formula One, even though many people think he deserves that seat in Formula One. There are so many drivers out there that I'd love to see have a go and have an opportunity to really take that step up into the top part of motorsport. And Audi are coming in. It is breaking. They're into Formula One. And that does mean that's going to open up so many more options for Formula One moving forward. And it means that we've got a brand new team to learn about too. And I'm really, really happy to see this. As you can tell, I'm absolutely buzzing that Audi are going to be coming in for 2026. And it was all confirmed over the course of the last couple of weekends. Obviously, we've kind of known this was going to happen. Obviously, it's been Audi, Porsche, and Andretti are the three teams that have really been linked over the course of this season with Formula One, with that movement, and whether or not they're going to come into Formula One. Basically, it turned out that Porsche was a link to Red Bull. We've seen that that has come true now. Porsche are now going to be working with Red Bull. Whether or not that could develop into a Porsche team along the line as well. You know, we've seen teams be an engine manufacturer before and then come in with their own team later on. Obviously, you can think of Aston Martin. Aston Martin were on the rear wing of that Red Bull car for so long. They were linked to Red Bull as a partnership for so long. And now they're obviously in Formula One themselves. They've got Fernando Alonso next year. They're doing very, very well for themselves, you know. And Audi could have a similar sort of outlet. I thought that Audi were going to come in possibly with that Sauber team and take over the Alfa Romeo mantle. But maybe they're also looking at becoming a team of their own. And that's sort of the next thing, isn't it? It's whether or not they're going to come in as this next generation team or whether they're going to take part in the championship as a separate entity. I think from what I've seen, Audi are going to come in to begin with and partner with another team, similar to Porsche, how they have done with Red Bull, and then move forward into sort of their own manufacturing setup. But let's have a little look at it, because obviously the German manufacturer Audi will join Formula One World Championship from the 2026 season as a power unit supplier. So that's what I mean. They're going to come in to begin with as a power unit supplier, understand, and then, you know, because of the new power unit regulations, because there's other things coming along the way, maybe there's an opportunity for them to come in as their own team and really build towards. Obviously, Audi are part of the Volkswagen group, so are Porsche, which is why there was so much sort of up and down between those two. You know, the Volkswagen group is absolutely massive at this point, but they are bringing in multitudes of teams now, and there's lots of different moving parts coming into Formula One. And it is that 2026 regulation that seems to be the big thing for a lot of these teams. The fact that Formula One is trying to be, as it says here, net zero carbon by 2030 is a huge selling point to lots and lots of manufacturers, sponsors, and people that want to come into Formula One. And obviously, they said that they're delighted that Audi is coming into Formula One, an iconic automotive brand pioneer and technological innovator. Of course, the CEO, Stefano Domenicali, had to say, you know, you're not going to slag off a new team that comes into Formula One, are you? But he's being very, very kind to Audi, I would say. And as I said, this livery, very nice indeed. But Audi announced that their entry to the 2026 press conference at Spa ahead of this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix, which featured chairman and board management of Audi AG Marcus Duesman. So they have confirmed it. It's all done and dusted. Formula One have put out the tweets. They've put out the the news stories, the articles, and Audi are now going to become part of that engine manufacturing team. I think there's a couple of questions that come from this, though. First of all, why 2026? Lots of people will be like, why are you coming in at 2026? We've seen Porsche coming in with Red Bull already. Next season, they're going to have a partnership. So why wait until 2026? What's the point in working until 2026? And I'm going to go over to this WTF1 article because 2026, I don't think people have realized, but is a massive step forward in the regulations for Formula One. I think because we've had this season, and obviously the 2021 to 2022 regulation change was a huge overhaul, we've kind of forgotten that there's also going to be a secondary massive overhaul to the regulations in 2026, just 4 seasons away. We kind of go through these cycles in Formula One, and 4 seasons is not that long. 2026 is going to come up on us. We're already over halfway through this 2022 season, and then we've only got 3 more seasons of these regulations before they completely switch up all over again. And of course, they develop and adapt as we go through the seasons anyway. But if we read into it a little bit, this was obviously posted quite a while ago, but it's talking about those 2026 regulations. So there are a few little bits and pieces where it links to the possibility of Porsche and Audi coming in, and now we obviously know that that is the case moving forward. But the chassis is going to change. We're going to get bigger, heavier. Of course, that is just basically how Formula One goes. These cars get bigger, they get longer, they get wider, they get heavier. That is how Formula One has developed over the last few seasons. And genuinely, if you look at a Formula One car from 20 years ago to now, they look absolutely gigantic. But, you know, that is also to do with safety. And we've got that auto crash prevention coming in for 2026 as well. We are always trying to increase the safety. These drivers are what make the sport. They are what we have to hold on to. There's a reason that the drivers become the focal point almost. You know, it is a team sport. We have hundreds of engineers, hundreds of people working at manufacturing plants. We have hundreds of people making various moving parts, hundreds of people that go to the Grand Prix and are on the pit wall with the pit team all of the weekend. But most of the time, we spend our time talking about the drivers. They are the real heartbeat of Formula One, along with the fans and the fact that they bring so much to the sport. Formula One is centered around the drivers. It's so important that we keep those drivers as healthy and as safe as possible. And that is why Formula One is becoming safer and safer and safer, because we have had incidents in the past where it's gone wrong and we lose out on a driver. And as I said, those drivers are the heartbeat of sport. They are what we need to keep the sport going. They are what really glues everything together and makes everything work. So there is going to be obviously bigger changes, and we always are developing safety in Formula One. But the huge thing for me, and the reason that Porsche and Audi, I think, are most interested in coming in 2026 specifically, rather than building up to it over the next few years, is the engine, is the fuel. We've seen engine manufacturers in the past, Mercedes, Red Bull, Renault, Ferrari, all the 4 at the moment, but there is going to be a huge overhaul in 2026. The V6 engines are staying, but the way that the power unit is kind of integrated with the rest of the systems is slightly changing. We're getting more electrical power, up to 350 kilowatts, to avoid any performance drop levels. They're trying to keep the pinnacle of motorsport being the pinnacle of motorsport. You still want Formula One to be the fastest of the fastest, the best of the best in terms of those cars. So you need to make sure that you're still giving them the power to do so. But we know that we do need to compensate. We need to understand that we want to move towards this net zero. We want to move towards 2030 being as positive as we possibly can and being better for the environment. And it's always been thrown at Formula One. And that was the discussion around what Sebastian Vettel said during his retirement announcement, wasn't it? You know, he talked about how Formula One and his beliefs, his system don't quite mesh at this point in time. Maybe if, you know, Sebastian Vettel was born 20 years later and he came into the sport in 2050, those things would absolutely mesh together, because that is where we're going. But in, you know, Sebastian Vettel's eyes, we aren't going there quick enough. This is a big step towards where he wants the sport to be, we want the sport to be, and the surrounding factors, you know, making sure that we are looking after the planet that we literally live on is where we want to be. And of course, the fuel itself They actually had a big change to the fuel this season. I think that's another thing that went a little bit under the radar with 2022 because the aerodynamics were so different. Everybody was focused on the fact that the cars look different for 2022. There was huge changes to the fuel and the fuel injection systems as well. And I mean, we saw it with Red Bull over the first few races of the season. Race 1 and race 3, was it, where Max Verstappen had DNFs? That was down to that fuel injection system. That was down to possibly a misfire, possibly something going wrong. That was because we're using a new fuel, a new injection system, and it was just a little bit of a hiccup from Red Bull. And that's why we haven't seen those problems arise again, because they obviously came to a little bit of an understanding what they'd done wrong, changed the dynamics of it. Whereas we've seen other teams, let's point at Ferrari, where the engine is still not quite there with the new engine regulations, with the new fuel that we've got for 2022. And now we've got 2026 as well. 100% sustainable synthetic fuel is going to be fully developed just for Formula One. Basically going to, again, move towards that net zero carbon. So that is why the teams want to come in for 2026. That is why Audi are thinking of coming in for the 2026 season in particular, because it aligns with their ethos a little bit more. And it aligns with lots of Formula One teams' ethoses a little bit more. And to be honest with you, I am very, very pleased. Let's talk about Audi in particular, because we've seen a little bit of an Audi livery being shown here, like just a little bit of red, a little bit of silver, a little bit of black. I am absolutely behind this. Obviously, if they do come in and they decide to take over a team and then look in a different direction, this might not be exactly what it looks like, considering the only sponsor on here is Audi. And also, we've seen with Williams, sometimes, you go for a bit of an extravagant livery and then eventually you have to try and strip the paint back to get the weight down. But the Audi Sport does look incredibly good, and it looks absolutely it looks like it's going to be quick, doesn't it? When you look at a Formula One car and you're like, that looks like it is going to be quick. It just has that feel to it for me. But I think the final thing to talk about is how this changes for Formula One as a whole. Because when a new Formula One manufacturer comes in, when a new engine manufacturer comes in, when a new team comes in, it changes the entire balance of Formula One, because it is so many moving parts to one team. Audi are a huge franchise. They're going to have a massive pull. And we have seen that Aston Martin have been able to pull engineers, drivers even, from bigger teams. We have seen that, Aston Martin were told off a little bit earlier on in the season, or investigated a little bit, because they had so many links to Red Bull, because they had brought in so many people from Red Bull, and then their car started to look a little bit like a Red Bull. There was, question marks there. Audi have a similar sort of thing, right? Where they will have a draw, they will have a pulling power, they will have the money and the facilities behind them to pick up the best of the best from those big teams and continue to move the team forward. So I think what we're going to see is Audi come in and actually not sit at the back of the field, but be a real shake-up for the grid. On top of that, it then links all the way down again to those drivers, the real heartbeat of the team. I think Audi will want to have their own say. They will want to stamp their own authority on the drivers right now. So Alfa Romeo at this point have Valtteri Bottas confirmed for 2023, but they do not have a second driver. And I think I had been personally one that said, if Mick Schumacher left Haas, I didn't really see him at that Alfa Romeo seat. I don't know what it was. There was just something that didn't quite click with me. The fact that they now have Audi, a German car brand, and the possibility of picking up one of the hottest German prospects in Mick Schumacher, I could see Mick Schumacher moving over to that team. And I think that's the main thing, because, well, even Audi alluded to it themselves. They literally said, drivers wanted, submit CB. So Audi are clearly, looking for new drivers, looking for a new direction, and trying to understand what they can do moving forward, right? So I think that Mick Schumacher becomes a huge piece of the puzzle here, because he is the sole German driver. A little bit like when Mercedes came in and they picked up Nico Rosberg. Obviously, they had Michael Schumacher come into the team as well. Very helpful. But they picked up Nico Rosberg, a young German driver who was part of the team and then went on to win that 2016 World Championship. You know, he was a real heavy part of Mercedes taking that next step forward. Yes, of course, Lewis Hamilton came in. Lewis Hamilton then went on to win multitudes of world titles. What was it? 6 world titles with Mercedes. So he was kind of the shining light, I guess. Lewis Hamilton was the big pickup, that like next generation driver. But Nico Rosberg was the first step in that. I could see Mick Schumacher being the first step for an Audi. Now, 2026 is a long way down the line. It could be a little while. There could be a huge, change up in the drivers that are available. There could be a wonder kid German driver that's like 13 years old right now. And in 3 years' time, he does like a Max Verstappen, comes onto the Formula One grid at 16 years old and absolutely destroys it. But I think personally, Mick Schumacher, being German, being available now, having experience in Formula One, has become more of a hot property to have. I think when you've got that opportunity to bring in a driver who has the same nationality as your team, many teams absolutely love that. We've got Ocon with Alpine. They're bringing in French drivers. Pierre Gasly is always linked to Alpine whenever there is a seat available. I think if Pierre Gasly hadn't signed an AlphaTauri contract earlier this season, Alpine would be very interested in Pierre, not only because he is an incredibly good driver, but also has that French link. He is French. They want to bring in drivers that have a link to the team, because it just builds that brand. It builds that understanding between the team. Alfa Romeo to end their partnership at the end of 2023? Most probably, yes. I'd imagine that, as I said, Audi are going to come in and take that Sauber role to begin with. And then I think when it gets to 2023, we could see a little bit of breaking away and almost becoming your own team. I think that's the only thing with the Sauber kind of brand, right? The Sauber thing. We always see it change hands quite often, because you can never really be your sole team. And I think that's what we might see in 2026. I genuinely think we might see Porsche and Audi kind of spread out and become their own sole teams, rather than working with Red Bull, rather than working with Sauber, kind of become their own entities further down the line. Obviously, that's massive speculation from me, but that's what I think might happen. And then we've got 12 teams on the grid, and I've always personally been an advocate for 12 teams. I think 12 teams is the sweet spot for Formula One. I think 10, just because there's 20 seats, obviously, there's just that little bit too few. We see so many drivers just drift past Formula One at this point when there's 10 teams, where realistically they probably should have been given a go, but they just didn't quite hit the right time, didn't hit the right team at the right place. And it was just, well, Nick De Vries is that one, isn't he? One Formula 2, one Formula E, yet still hasn't driven in a Formula 1 car because there just isn't the space for him. If there were 12 teams, he'd undoubtedly be in a seat right now. Undoubtedly be in a seat, but it's just unfortunate for him. There's only 10 teams. Lots of drivers are sticking around for longer. Fernando Alonso, is one of the older drivers that there will ever be in Formula One. Same with Kimi Räikkönen. He's stuck around for maybe not too long, because Fernando Alonso is still an incredible driver right now, but longer than expected, I think you would say, and therefore is detracting from those younger drivers coming through, because that seat is available for less and less time. Now, if you're good enough, that's fair enough. No, in the case of Fernando Alonso, he was exceptional. He deserves to be in Formula One. I think Kimi Räikkönen may be stuck around for a couple of seasons too long, in my opinion. I think, we didn't really see the best of him in those final couple of years, to be honest with you. Final thing I want to chat about, though, is Andretti. So we've had Porsche, we've had Audi. Both of those guys have managed to get themselves at least a partnership in Formula One, if not, their own sole team. And I think because there was so much of a link between Alfa Romeo and Andretti last season, I genuinely thought the Alfa Romeo Andretti partnership would be coming. I thought that was almost a guarantee, to be honest with you. I thought once the new regulations came in, 2022, Alfa Romeo maybe have a season or so to try and get their feet under the carpet. Is that a saying? Probably not. But Andretti, I thought were going to be that next step. Andretti, I thought were going to come in, but Porsche and Audi have kind of beat them to the punch a little bit. They've kind of come in out of nowhere and actually beaten Andretti to the Formula One seat. So specifically Audi, if they are going to be part of that Sauber group, they're going to take over Alfa Romeo. That was kind of where we thought Andretti were going to be. So now Andretti are in a really awkward situation where every time you talk to Mario, he talks about the fact that he wants to be in Formula One. He's got all the pieces in place. He's just waiting for Formula One to confirm it for him. You know, he's never backed down on the fact that he wants to be part of Formula One. So where does Andretti now fit in? Where is the Andretti piece of the puzzle? Will we ever see Andretti? Will we ever see an Andretti team? Because if Porsche and Audi have kind of, you know, winked to Formula One and said, we're going to come in as this engine manufacturer or this partner for now, and then we want our own team when it comes to 2026 or 2030, you know, down the line. If that is the case, and they've kind of done that, and Formula One now know that they're going to have another couple of German teams in there. So we're going to have Mercedes as a German team, obviously Audi and Porsche now as a German team. Then Andretti comes in and is like, we'd like to be the 13th team. The money in Formula One can only be stretched so thin. Like, that's the main thing, isn't it? The 10 teams don't really want other teams to come in, because it just means that every overall sponsorship gets stretched a little bit thinner. Your availability to pick up sponsors is a little bit less. So other teams, quite rightfully, are a little bit selfish and don't want more teams to come into Formula One. So Andretti now find themselves in a real sticky situation because Audi and Porsche have beat them to the punch. But I'd love to know what you think. Do Andretti still have an opportunity? Is there an Andretti team coming? Or is it all talk from Mario at this point? He's kind of missed the boat because Porsche and Audi have beaten him to the punch. Second thing I'd love to know in the comments down below, who do you think Audi get in as their Formula One drivers? If Audi were in Formula One, let's say they take over the Alfa Romeo team, they've got Valtteri Bottas for another year. Who do you think their two drivers will be in like 2024? Who do you think that Audi, if they could pick any two drivers on the grid, who do you think they'd go for? Because I'd love to know your thoughts. Obviously, do they go German? Do they go Mick Schumacher? Do they have that pulling power? Do they have the opportunity to go big? Is a Daniel Ricciardo someone like that on the cards that is an expensive driver to get in, but somebody with prestige, somebody who can drive the team forward? I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be live tomorrow for the Belgian qualifying as well, and I'll see you next time.